You are listening to The Scope, a podcast dedicated to having open conversations about healthcare topics relevant to our patients and community. Today we're talking about making rural America healthy again. Let's get started. Today our guest is Jason Meadows, a pharmacist at Phelps Health. Welcome to our show today, Jason.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, we're super excited to have you. I know you have your own podcast, so we're gonna try to do something a little different this time. We're filming, we're not just recording.
Right.
So before we get started, I would love if you would just tell us a little bit about yourself and kind of your background.
Sure. Well, I'm from the area. I was born and raised outside of Cuba, so just down the road. My family has a lot of history in the area. My dad, his family moved up here from the Boot Heel in the 50s. So as soon when my granddad got back home from World War II, he was in the Navy in Hawaii, actually. And after he got back, they moved up here because they had family up here. And so that's kind of how my family got started up here. My dad he owned a sale barn in Cuba, and he had if you still sell cattle around here from the 70s through the 90s, you probably know my dad. So my brother, same deal. He worked out with my dad too. So, we have a history in the area of being cattle producers. But we also have a history of pharmacy. My brother-in-law actually owned the pharmacy in Cuba for several years, and that's where I worked at through high school, and that was the reason I went to pharmacy school. The first place. My summer jobs were when I wasn't working on the farm for my dad, I was delivering medicine for my brother-in-law. So, I've had this connection with both worlds for such a long time. I came back here in 2000. I graduated college in 2008, worked at the hospital. That's actually where I met my wife. My wife was a nurse in the ICU at the time. We were married about a year later. I actually left, worked for my brother-in-law as a pharmacist for a year, and came back. I've been back at Phelps Health since 2010.
Wow, so you just missed us that much.
Missed it that much, right? Yeah, well, the big thing pulling me back now. I love my job. I love being here, but the biggest thing pulling me back was coming back and getting health insurance,
Yes.
Because Carrie got pregnant with twins.
Yeah, that'll do it.
It'll do it, So, it was bigger than me at that point. I had possibilities of owning a pharmacy someday that was in my plans, but, being back here, and I don't regret any decisions. It was one of the best decisions I've ever made to be back.
That's
here.
really great to hear.
Yeah.
I love that. So whenever you were talking about, your whole family has kind of had almost like two lives. So you've been cattle producers, but then on the opposite side of this, a lot of you guys have worked in the medical field, clinical facing, you've been pharmacists. So what has that been like for your family? Because you're doing so many different things.
Yeah, you just balance. I don't think that's the right word, because I don't think that's anything you're able to achieve. But just trying to make sure that the appropriate thing gets the appropriate attention at the right time. Then you add in family dynamic type stuff to it too. You try to make sure that everything gets the attention when it deserves it.
So one of the things that you do outside of work, on top of everything else that you do, is you have this podcast called Ag State of Mind, which I think is really cool. Tell us a little bit about the focus of that podcast and kind of what inspired you to begin it, because you have over 50 some odd episodes, or probably larger.
75 this week.
Which is amazing. Congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah, it's been, it was something where I've been wanting to combine the two somehow, my perspective on agriculture and my perspective in healthcare, for a really long time now. And it was something that I probably wanted to start sometime when I was in college, but I never really could figure out how. And then same when I was going through trying to figure out both ways. But then I got really interested in mental health care. I thought about maybe there's some way to make some sort of integrative care team here at Phelps Health. That was never more than an idea in my head. But then I just decided, hey, what's the best way I can just reach the most amount of people with a single effort, but it also be coming solely from me, and I think the podcast was the best way I found out how to do that. That was in 2019. And I never thought that it would be. I thought I would get make 8-10 episodes, and then we'll see after that. But it took off. It got so much traction, people paying a lot of attention
it's kind of
to
blown up on
it.
you
It really
almost.
has. That was never something I anticipated, and led to me meeting some really great people and having some really, really interesting conversations and insightful conversations. And I think it's something that's helping people out, and not only is it helping people out, it's helped me out too. I didn't say this, but I've been very, very frank about it in my podcast and in my writing and everything, is that I've had struggles with my own mental health. It's a hard thing to talk about, which I'm sure we'll get into in a little bit, but it being able to connect me with these people, but also connect me with some resources, connect me with some sound tactics to make myself better. And so it's been good for me as well. So I mean, it's been a really cool thing that I've been able to do.
Yeah, I think whenever I was looking into what types of questions am I going to ask for this podcast, how do we make rural America healthy again? Man, that's so broad.
Mm-hmm.
And I started looking up specific questions about farmers and rural America in general, and it was really difficult to find resources because I'm from Salem, Missouri. I'm from a really, really
Sure.
small town as well. And so I think what you're doing is really probably resonating with a lot of people who are in similar situations as you and I.
Mm-hmm.
So I think one of the first questions I want to ask to just dive right in is, what are some of the challenges that we often face in healthcare settings in rural communities?
I think the biggest thing is, so when you see this from like an outside looking in, you see it as, small community, small town, doesn't need that many providers. But what we don't understand is we serve such a big community. I mean, Rolla, let's take Rolla for example. It's 20,000 people, one hospital. That seems like it's enough, right? Yeah. But it serves all these outlying areas, and they're all funneling in here, and it's not hard to run out of providers, run out of stuff to do, where that's maybe not the case in an urban area where I feel like the providers load matches the population. And I feel like that's something that that's one of the biggest things that we're dealing with. Another thing that we're dealing with is just as far as mental health care is concerned, is the willingness to be treated, to be seen for it, because there's such a stigma that is surrounding that, and people don't know necessarily how to go about that, or that they should go about it. And that's a huge obstacle that healthcare providers in a rural setting have to face. I mean, it's because we've been taught and been conditioned to believe that we have to take care of ourselves. We have a very independent, strong spirit, and that's good. I mean, that's a thing that doesn't need to be discounted, because it's got us through a lot of hard times. But in the same breath, it doesn't lend itself to trying to get outside help very often. So it's almost like a paradox.
Yeah, so that also makes me think about whenever you talk about the stigma in rural healthcare and mental health, I can think of dozens and dozens of people because I also have struggled with mental health. And so I often will just tell people, I go to a therapist and I think it's amazing. And I love seeing the looks on people's faces because it takes them aback, especially in these types of communities.
Right.
So do you think that's something that people struggle with as well, is just being able to have those types of conversations?
Yeah.
It's not a bad thing to want to take care of your mental health.
And I'll take it a step further, is people don't even necessarily know what counseling or therapy looks like. I was having a conversation with a woman today who reached out to me. She's actually in Denver now, but she's from a small farming community in Kansas, and she said, something that I think is needed among the rural population is for someone to sit down and kind of lay out what therapy or counseling may look like, because it's probably a bit different than they have in their mind. So I mean, that's a little bit of I didn't think of that perspective until I talked to her today. just, and like you're saying, you've been to see somebody
Mm-hmm.
and talked about that experience. More people talking like that and making see, hey, normal people do
Yes,
this, right?
it should be normalized. It
Exactly.
should be just like going to your primary care provider to make sure that your body is functioning correctly, because your mind is part of your body.
Well, that's the thing about it. I mean, it's why, you would not fault somebody for going to see their primary care for high blood pressure, diabetes,
Mm-hmm.
high cholesterol. Brain health is no different. Behavioral health is no different. It's, in fact, it's maybe more integral because it controls everything else. I mean, it's a lot of things are stem from that, and it should be at least paid as close attention to.
Yes, one example I always love to talk about. We did a podcast last year with Pam Gray, and she talked about stress and anxiety and all these things. They directly affect like your weight
Mm-hmm.
and how much you eat or how much you exercise. And if you don't take care of your mental health, it's going to affect your physical health at some point in time.
Yeah, and that's what I've been trying to get across with the podcast too. Is health is it's a holistic topic. Mm-hmm. It's not something where you can separate, oh, let's take care of our mental health now, we'll take care of our physical health in a little bit, or vice versa.
Yeah, you can't put it in boxes.
Yeah, it's not. I mean, it's an interconnected system where everything works together.
So as you've been doing all of these podcasts, because you just said that you've done your 75th one, mm-hmm. So you've gained all of this knowledge from all of these, rural communities and these farmers, and I know you even did one, I think that was overseas, right?
Couple, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So from talking to these people, what are some of their examples of how rural areas can kind of help improve the health of their communities?
Well, be a leader, I think, is the big part of it. There has to be somebody out in front because let's face it, we're rolling a snowball up a mountain. Mm-hmm. I mean, and it's going to get a little bit easier every time we get somebody behind that ball and keep rolling it. So, but it has to happen. Those people have to get behind that, and there has to be, one person started out, and then a few more, then eventually it's going to keep going. I mean, we're a long ways from there, yes. But we're getting more and more people who are behind that, and I think that's the key, is showing people, normal people like you and I, showing them that these are normal things to talk about. It's okay to talk about it, and it's okay to share your struggles. And I think that's a big part of the problem, that people aren't comfortable sharing their struggles. They're comfortable sharing the easy parts, but the hard parts is not so much the case. And it makes them feel very vulnerable. But at the same time, if they know that it can really help somebody out, I think the community spirit of rural America will shine through.
Yeah, that you make a really great point with that too, and that also makes me think about our hospital system and how unique and special it is. Because often whenever you go to a primary care provider, you know them, probably personally.
Right.
You don't get that in these large urban areas.
No.
And so I think that really makes a difference. So that kind of leads me to my next question. What can the hospital systems do to help educate the public on these types of mental health issues?
I think finding people who are willing to talk about it, again, finding people from the community. And that's a thing that I think rural America is really good at, is sniffing out a phony. That's something that we, is to be contended with, but at the same time, it's something that we can use to our advantage. Mm-hmm. Finding people who are who are part of that culture, part of that demographic, who are willing to speak out about it and willing to share their story. That's the healthcare system's finding those type of people and getting them to put their story out there. Huge. That's huge for community effort.
So something that you mentioned too, whenever we talk about community effort, my mind immediately goes to farm families, because you're a farm family, right?
Yeah.
My family, they date back generations in Salem as well, and so I think about how many of my family members probably don't have access to health insurance, or they don't come in until it's too late and they've already had a major cardiac event, at which point they probably could have prevented if they would have taken care of their mental health, or if they would have just gone in to see a PCP. So how do we prevent those types of circumstances from happening?
So, and somebody, my friend Adrienne DeSutter, she does a lot of work. She's from Illinois, and she does a lot of work in the same area as me. In fact, I'd say she's 10 times better than me because she's so good at it. But she told me once, and she didn't come up with this herself, but I can't remember who came up with it, but I always credit it to her. When you're dealing with farm families, people who are on a farm, they're very familiar with maintenance, right? I mean, maintenance of their cow herd, maintenance of their machinery, maintenance of everything, all the assets around. Why would themselves be no different? And I think when you start getting people into that mindset, to thinking that they are an asset to their farms, asset to their families, then they can start taking care of themselves a little bit better. If they see that everything doesn't work right if they're not taken care of. Just like a tractor, if you don't change the oil on the tractor, it's going to burn up. If you don't vaccinate your cow herd, you're going to have disease. Same thing with you. If you don't do the maintenance on yourself, taking care of yourself, both physically and mentally, then you're going to burn out. You aren't going to be at peak performance.
And that makes me want to ask you another question. Why are farm families such an asset to rural America?
What
value do they provide?
Oh my gosh, there's such a. I keep coming back to this idea of this saying of community, and that's what they create. I mean, these farm families, they're the ones who are volunteering at the schools, volunteering at your churches, at all these things. They're coaching your little league games. They're cooking at the concession stands and stuff. They're volunteering. It's just they make that, and they do it as it's fun for them. They don't do it because it's like an obligation. They do it because they enjoy it, and they enjoy the community that they bring to it. And having those communities, and again, like you say, that generational people passing down those traditions, that's what keeps that spirit alive.
Yeah, I think that's so special, and to me it's almost like they do this to the detriment of their health sometimes. And so I think it's so important that we help educate them on, hey, you're an asset. If you want to keep coming and working this hot dog stand, if you want to keep working your farm and doing all of these things, you have to take care of yourself. You can't fill from an empty cup, right?
Right, exactly.
So it's that type of concept to me.
For sure, yeah.
So on one of your podcasts, you talked to this guy whose name is Dave Pratt, who owned Ranching for Profit Schools, which I think is really, really cool. But we won't get into that. We don't have time for that today.
Sure.
So he mentioned a concept that I think really kind of applies to healthcare. And it's called owner value, which is who, what, when, where, and why. And I think this is really, really unique to healthcare, and the idea of how do we define owner value in healthcare and really get people to start investing in themselves in a way that they understand. And almost you kind of answered this by saying, hey, you're an asset. You need to take care of yourself, right?
Yeah.
And so I think it's so cool to listen to all of these farming podcasts and say, no, this also is applicable in healthcare.
Right. And that's what the thing about it is I did a podcast on agriculture because, that's where my passion is. That's what I love. That's what I do. That's what my family does. That's who I care about. That's who I wanted to serve. But the lessons that are learned within it are applicable for everyone. Not even just rural people. Across the board, all the people that I talk to, they have such incredible value to bring people that anybody can pay attention to it. I know of people in cities that listen to the podcast, not because they are
trying to move to the States.
Yeah, exactly. But they found valuable information in the guest, and that's something that we can all apply to ourselves. Is you talk about owner value, you talk about the things that bring you not just monetary value, but joy in your life and make you feel good, make you feel happy, and that's a part of health too, right? Making sure that you're enjoying yourself, because if you do things that you enjoy, or as many things you can that you enjoy, then you are going to be healthier. I think it goes without saying.
So how does that work in your personal life, if you can give this example? Because I know that you do a lot of different things.
Yeah.
So how do you find this intrinsic value and this almost, I'm going to call it contentedness, right? Because for me, that's a great definition of happiness and joy, is finding contentedness in the average everyday things, such as, going out and working the farm and then coming in and filling prescriptions or whatever it is.
It's a good question, because it's something I'll admit I struggle with it from time to time. But it goes back to what I think we talked about in the very beginning, and there's not really anything like balance. There's something that everything takes the appropriate attention at the appropriate time. I mean, I've got a wife and 4 kids who are starting baseball season right now, and it's crazy. We live 12 miles outside of town, so I mean, my wife's going back and forth doing that, and I got a farm, a job here where I work 40 hours a week, then a podcast, and we opened a yoga studio in Cuba.
Wow.
Yeah, so I mean, we're doing a lot of things, but making sure that we take the time, and it doesn't have to be a lot. It can be. I always say this: you have to take some breaks. Breaks can be 5 minutes, 5 seconds, or sometimes 5 days. Like you have to work some breaks in there. You have to be really. And I think the word that comes to mind is intentional. You have to be really, really intentional with your time, and we all have the same amount of time in our day. Every single one of us has 24 hours. 7 days a week, you know what I mean? It's up to us how we spend them. And I found myself being much more intentional with how I spend that. I don't know the last time I watched TV, you know what I mean? Because not that I can't say that I don't have time for it, but I don't want to make the time for it. There's other things that are more important to me. So there's this analogy that it's actually more like an anecdote that Dr. Stephen Covey talks about. The big rocks in the sand. Have you ever heard this?
Yes.
You know what I'm talking about, where the best way the only way that you can make sure you get those big rocks in that bucket is to put them in first. So the big rocks for me are obviously work, my family, farm, podcast, yoga studio, and church. All those things. Those are my 6 big things. Making sure those get fit in first, then the little things can slide in between them. But if I don't get those in first, and that's for every single person to decide what's important to them. Everybody gets to decide. That's what the great thing about it is. Everybody gets to decide what their rocks are. So
because maybe for somebody else, Netflix is the rocks.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
Yeah, and I don't want to discount because some people really enjoy that, but I don't enjoy it enough to make time for it.
Yeah, well, your value set is different. Everybody has their own value set.
For sure, yeah.
What are some of the stressors that you think farmers have faced over the past few years that maybe could be attributed to some of the massive stress that they're facing right now?
Yeah, I mean, gosh, there's a lot of things, and I talk about these things, and I'm going to try and remember them. Trade's a big thing as far as who's going to buy the products, what are the prices going to look like, all of that. Weather's been kind of a nightmare over the last few years. I mean, I don't know if it's any different, but it seems like these last couple of years have been really tough. I mean, we're just coming off this cold snap that was a nightmare for us. And then the tensions between like consumer and producer seem to be, I wouldn't say tensions, but like disconnect, I think is probably a better word, where people on one side of the consumer side of the supply chain are totally not understanding what's happening on the producer side and vice versa. So, I mean, somebody who's eating a steak in New York probably doesn't understand the life of someone who's raising beef in the middle of Missouri. So that's a big thing that I think has really come on and is very unique to this time in agriculture. The last time the 80s were really tough for farmers, but I don't think they had to contend with that as much as we do now. And I think the world's gotten smaller, but also, even though it's smaller, it's gotten more disconnected, more polarizing. So I mean, there's a lot of things that factor into it.
So whenever you talk about this, one thing that I really thought about was the weather. Let's talk about that cold snap, because I saw a lot of people on Facebook, because I'm from Salem, a lot of people own cattle, and I saw a few people have lost their calves. How difficult are those types of environments? Because a lot of people were really excited that they got snow days and they were out of school for like 2 weeks, but that's actually a really difficult, terrible type of circumstance for you guys, right?
It's tough. It's really tough, and man, I gotta watch it because I'll start getting teary-eyed here, because it was a very taxing time on me and my family. We weren't calving. I made the decision last year because the thing about the cattle business is any decision that you make you don't like reap the benefits or like suffer through them for a really long time, because so let's take for instance calving season. You have to decide your calving season 9 months in advance, because that's how long a gestation period is for a cow. It's 283 days very close to a human. But you have to make that decision. Usually we would have been calving in February, but last summer I said, I'm going to change it. I'm going to try and make it to April. Try green grass, warmer weather, everything hopefully be easier. And, that's going to mean that my calves aren't going to be as heavy at the end, but it was a sacrifice I was willing to make for my peace of mind. Well, it turned out really well for us because we didn't have anything. Well, we had one, but everything was fine. I think the bull must have gotten out or something. But anyway, that turned out really well. But I know so many people it didn't, and there were. I've been there, calves in my bathroom at night. But for me, like what I went through, it was up at 4 every morning, cutting ice. Ice this thick, on 4 different farms. Then thankfully my kids were out of school, so they could do some stuff when I was at work, and then I'd come up back and I'd do it all over again. It was 14, 15-hour days, and it would have been longer if we would have been calving, So, man, that was really, really tough on me, tough on our family, tough on a lot of families like mine, because a lot of people lost animals. Not just calves, cows too. We were talking about, the ponds freezing and cows falling through the ice, losing them. And it's just like, it's hard enough anyway. Things are hard enough as they are, but then to add something, a freak weather event like that into the mix.
Yeah, and then you go back to this idea of, mental fortitude, and a lot of people as farmers think, well, it's fine, we'll get through it, we've always gotten through it, but I think it's okay to take a moment and say, this is really tough and this is really difficult, and I think it's okay that our family isn't okay right now. We've been working like 100 hours a week.
Yeah, and that's the thing I had to do myself. It's just like, you have to, there's this saying in the military, I wasn't involved in the military, but I know a lot of people that are, it's called embrace the suck. You just kind of got to recognize that things are tough, and if you recognize that things are tough, don't sugarcoat it, don't put it away, but recognize that it's tough, acknowledge that, and then get through it anyway. That makes it much, I don't want to say easier, but you seem to get through it better.
Yeah, it's interesting listening to you say that, embrace the suck, because I have a list here, and it's pretty long of, some of the farm family stressors, like physical and mental chronic health problems, not just for, the person, but for their whole family. Depression, anxiety, suicide, injuries, opioid misuse, loneliness, social isolation, because a lot of times you're out by yourself cutting that ice, right? You don't have anybody with you. Inhibited decision making, lack of access to health care, postponement of preventative care, because who else is going to cut that ice? If your kids are too young, you don't want to send them out by yourself, or if your father's too old to do it, or whoever it is, you know what I mean? Concern of inability to pay for medical care costs. We run across that all the time in rural healthcare because Phelps Health serves a 6-county region, and we run into that on a daily basis. And then juggling on and off work, because not only do you own a farm, you also work a 40-hour work week, and your wife also owns a business, and then you also have 4 kids who are managing sports at the same time. So I'm reading this list, and in my head I'm like, how do you do it?
You just do it. You just do it. Yes. You accept the lifestyle, right? There's sacrifices that are involved in it. We we had to tell one of our kids that he's not gonna be able to he's gonna play baseball, but not travel baseball. Because we all have to have limits, right?
Yeah, and that's a huge commitment.
It is, and it's all about having your boundaries, right?
Yes.
Boundaries are a huge thing, and it's hard for me because I grew up, even though I'm the youngest of 5, I basically grew up as an only child because I was so much younger than my siblings. So I never heard no a lot. You know what I mean?
And here you are saying no.
Yeah, exactly. So I have zero perspective on that as a child. So it's difficult for me as a father to put those boundaries on my kids because they weren't put on me very much. For a reason, you know what I mean? My mom and dad wanted me to have the best childhood they could, but it's different.
Yeah, different circumstances.
Totally different circumstances. And but it's good. They recognize, in fact, we were talking just this week, I think, and I can't remember what sparked the conversation, but we were talking about, would you rather live in town or live where we live? And even my kid that doesn't even like the farm. I had one of the boys just he care less, and he said, "Oh no, I'm gonna live on the farm." So I mean,
it's a lifestyle.
It's a lifestyle. There's sacrifices involved. They don't get to maybe do quite as many things as some kids get to do, but they get to have a really cool life.
So how do you know, whether it's your kids or yourself or, even your parents or somebody like that, how do you know when they need interventional help? Like, let's say you said no to them, or maybe your parents are older and they just keep doing the same amount of workload and they just can't do it on the farm anymore. How do you know when to have that conversation?
So you have to pay attention. Like, I had a podcast with Nathan Brown. He's a really good friend of mine. He's from Ohio, and he talked about this situation where he had a friend call him to help. He needed help loading some hogs, something like that. I can't remember exactly the whole situation. And Nathan knew that it was something that was out of the ordinary for him to ask for help like that, just because he just doesn't. Well, it turned out loading the hogs wasn't that big a deal, but instead he wanted to talk about his stressors. He wanted to talk about the things that had been bothering him, family issues, financial issues. And it would have probably been really easy for Nathan to tell him, "Oh man, my kids have got stuff. I'm busy. I don't know if I can do that." But he didn't. He answered that call. He saw that. He recognized that something was different with him because he was actually asking for help. And I think that's a good lesson that all of us can relate to, that if there's something out of the ordinary that somebody's talking about, that you just notice it just a little bit off with them, pay attention, follow up on that, because you never know what that kind of conversation. And that guy, it turns out, he went and got some help. He went and he became a spokesperson for their local counseling service in Ohio. And so I mean, it was a great thing they did, just because Nathan recognized the need to help out a friend. And I think that's something we can all again recognize, that when somebody's in need, answer the call.
Yeah, I love that. So what I hear whenever you say that is, recognize the need, answer the call, and follow up. Always follow up.
Always follow up. Yep.
I love that. I think that's really, really fantastic advice. And kind of my last question to wrap us up is, how do we build resilient and healthy rural communities? I know that's a really broad question.
It is a broad question, but it's a number of different ways. There's no real prescription for it, except for to be as active in those communities as you can. Like I said, be a friend to your neighbors. Be a friend to not even your neighbors. Be a friend to strangers in town. Let everybody know that you're there to help, because that's what it takes. It takes people who have that community spirit to build something like that, and to continue the tradition that we have of these strong rural communities, because they're the backbone of American life. I mean, I know more and more people are moving to urban areas, but I feel like the foundation of modern American life was built on rural communities.
Yeah, I would echo that. I lived in Springfield and we moved back here. So it's really cool to grow up in these types of communities. I think that's really special.
And that's another thing that you almost made a point for me there, in getting people who are here, who go away, getting them to somehow come back. They go away, get an education, but oftentimes they stay away. But trying to draw those people back into these rural communities that are going to not necessarily, I mean, it'd be great if all these mental health care professionals would do that.
If they all just moved in.
If they all moved back, that'd be great. We know that that's not necessarily, but to keep attracting as many people back to the rural communities after they have left to obtain training of some sort. I think that's going to be a big key going forward.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you so much for being here for this conversation.
Yeah,
I think it was a really important conversation to have, and I want to continue having these types of conversations.
Awesome. Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, so thanks so much for tuning into The Scope. If you liked our show and like to know more, check out phelpshealth.org.